US President Donald Trump has arrived in the Chinese capital for a high-stakes rendezvous with President Xi Jinping. He is flanked by a powerhouse caravan of American CEOs, including Elon Musk and Apple's Tim Cook. Trump is hunting for headline-grabbing deals, but the escalating war with Iran is casting a shadow over the talks. Fears are growing that Trump, desperate for a Middle East peace deal, may be willing to compromise on US support for Taiwan, which China considers part of its own territory.
Beijing put on a lavish display for the first visit to China of a US president in nearly a decade. Joining Trump are some of the biggest business leaders in the world. China and the US are currently in a fragile tariff truce after Trump imposed massive tariffs on China early in his second term. The US president is keen to strike big deals during the trip. But looming over Trump's visit is the war with Iran. China is heavily dependent on energy from the Middle East, and its economy is suffering due to the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Speaking ahead of the visit, Trump said he would have a long talk with Xi about Iran.
They get a lot of their oil from that area. We've had no problem, and he's been a friend of mine. He's been somebody that we get along with, and I think you're going to see that good things are going to happen. This is going to be a very exciting trip. A lot of good things are going to happen.
China is a key ally of Iran and has been involved in mediating peace talks between Tehran and Washington, along with Pakistan. Just last week, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi travelled to Beijing for talks with his Chinese counterpart. Trump's visit is being closely watched in Taiwan, where fears are growing that China could use its leverage over Iran to push the US to weaken its support for the island. Before the visit, Beijing made it clear that it would crush any Taiwan independence bid.
There is only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. Our resolve to oppose Taiwan independence is as firm as a rock, and our ability to crush separatism is unbreakable.
China has emphasized that Taiwan will be its main focus during Trump's visit. Beijing has not ruled out taking the island by force.
Since Donald Trump's last visit to China more than 8 years ago, the economic landscape has changed dramatically. Beijing no longer panics over Washington's tariff threats because it is armed with a record $1.2 trillion global trade surplus. But there is a standoff of sorts. While Washington holds the monopoly on advanced microchips, Beijing controls the minerals to make them. And both superpowers are grappling with the economic fallout of the Iran war.
It has been more than 8 years since the world's two most powerful men last met. As US President Donald Trump travels to Beijing these days, he will find a country with newfound self-confidence. Gone are the days when threats of punitive tariffs triggered panic among businesses. China has become more independent and has opened up new markets. While the country's trade with the US dropped by 20% last year, exports to Africa, Europe and Latin America grew significantly. Taken together, China is looking at a record global trade surplus of $1.2 trillion. Leading up to the summit, there was plenty of diplomatic window dressing. Despite the ongoing economic decoupling, both sides remain dependent on one another. The United States rely on China as an export market and a supplier of rare earth materials. Consequently, during his visit, Trump hopes to secure deals for his country's agricultural sector and for the aircraft manufacturer Boeing. China, for its part, seeks better access to advanced American technology, such as computer chips. While recently imposed tariffs have caused trade between the US and China to shrink drastically, a trade imbalance persists. China continues to sell far more goods to the US than the other way round. However, neither side currently has any interest in another escalation of the tariff dispute.
It's really, in some ways, a risk management summit that is coming at a very crucial time in the, not just the geopolitics, world geopolitics, but also in the global economy.
The global economy is currently under pressure, primarily due to the war in Iran. China could act as a mediator in the conflict. Just last week, Iran's foreign minister was in Beijing for talks. Front and center, the Strait of Hormuz. Opening this artery of the global economy would certainly be in the interest of all parties.
And earlier I spoke to Claus Soong. He's an analyst at the Murtagh Institute for China Studies. I asked him whether Trump's visit can mend a superpower relationship that is strained by trade wars and tech blockades.
Yes, I think that what we are seeing is that when President Trump tried to deal with the trade balance issue with China, right? So there are more corporate deal we can expecting and buy more America, right? And even in certain extent invest more in America if that is possible under the national security screening on the U.S. side. So yeah, I think that we see the corporate deals maybe a part of that more easier element that can show for Trump's to his audience back in the States that, hey, there's a win, we made a deal.
Now, Trump openly says that he wants to bargain with Xi over U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. Is he genuinely prepared to weaken support for Taipei to secure China's diplomatic help in maybe ending the war in Iran?
I think that is a question that's somehow more complicated, right? So on rhetoric, yes, maybe U.S. can give in something to have China to help to intervene in its relation with Tehran. But I think the key question is that how much China can do and how much U.S. can offer and how much both sides can trust each other, right? When U.S. saying about like Americans saying or Trump is saying about like we'll talk about Taiwan, what is agenda he prepared to, and does it align with Beijing's expectation, right? And what does Beijing ready to offer in return? I think these are the questions that yet to be seen, and it will be good to look further on to see whether whether is enough weight for what Beijing can offer to Washington, for Washington to say, hey, even changing the rhetoric from we do not support Taiwanese independence to we oppose Taiwanese independence.
Now, you touched upon this, but China has felt the economic sting of the war in Iran through disrupted oil supply lines and the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. How much leverage does Beijing actually have to force Tehran to the negotiation table?
I actually think that Beijing does not have much leverage on Iran than people might think. Right, and of course that is very common. Just citing from China's alignment with Russia to take, hey, China is a lifeline to Russia, and once China turn off the tap, the water won't flow, the war will stop. Right, but I think that's not the case. That exactly the same for Iran. Not even perfectly accurate for Russia. China have influence. China have more influence on well, not necessarily more influence, but more exposed to Russia. But what China exposed to Iran might be more limited, in my opinion. And I think that what China can do, China's Belt and Road doesn't stop Iran. It crosses over the strait to Gulf, and it has more influence in the region as through more on the financial term and the investment term, on trade as well. But for stopping Iran to give in to its core interests, for example, developing nuclear weapon and to loosen up the control of Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, I think that may be a bit to overestimate what China can do to Iran.
Now, talk of an informal group of two, a G2, has re-emerged ahead of this summit. Are we looking at a future where Washington and Beijing bypass traditional allies in Europe and Asia and run global security on their own terms without checking with anyone?
I think that's something that other countries should be concerned with, especially Europeans should be concerned with. When US and China forming a G2, we back to the bipolar rather than the multipolar or multiplex scenario on the global order, right? So G2 actually fit in Beijing's narrative when Beijing once said that the Pacific is wide enough to accommodate both US and China, right? It's actually elevating China to the same peers or more equal footage with US in its sense. And the G2 narrative actually helped with that, right? Trump is Trump's adore strongman, and Xi is the kind of strongman that look good in Trump's eye. But but it also means that there are much less multipolarity or multipolar engagement in world affairs. If U.S. and China set the deal and the rest just follow, I think that's not what an ideal scenario for most non-hegemonic power would look for that, right? And G2 is a narrative, but we don't know yet whether where is the G2 going? Where would G2 end, and how will it land? Right? Is it just a Trump thing, or when Trump is gone, will the leadership, the next American administration, will be more willing to assume the U.S. global leadership to get more engaged with the international affairs? Unlike now, Trump has more contraction on American first approach, right? But this definitely give Beijing a better position on its self-esteem and status in the international affairs to make it as more equal as the United States.
Claus Soong there, analyst at the Murtagh Institute for China Studies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Steve Tsang is the director of the China Institute at the SOAS University of London. Welcome, Steve. Beijing wants to focus on Taiwan. We heard it there. How high up is that on Trump's agenda?
Not very high on Trump's agenda. I think Trump will have a conversation with Xi Jinping because he wants things from Xi Jinping. And if Xi Jinping says that Taiwan is the issue he wants to talk about, Trump will talk about Taiwan. And Trump being Trump, it is not impossible that he will say something that his advisors had advised him not to say. So something like that can happen. But I don't think it is U.S. policies to simply trade Taiwan for Iran.
Yeah, but Donald Trump is known as someone who is easily manipulated, especially when he is welcomed in the fashion that we're seeing now in Beijing. All the pomp and circumstance, that always leaves a big impression on him. So isn't it a possibility that the Chinese might succeed in presenting Taiwan as a bargaining chip for Trump to get the deals done that he wants to take back home to the U.S.?
I think you're absolutely right. Any other U.S. president, it cannot happen. But with Donald Trump, nobody can be sure of that. But even Donald Trump would be aware that the United States today imports more from Taiwan in value terms than it does from China. So Taiwan matters to the United States in ways that the Middle East doesn't matter as much to the U.S. economy as a trading partner. And so he may not want to be making the kind of concessions over Taiwan that the Chinese thought that Trump might well be willing to do.
Mm-hmm. It's been reported that the U.S. president is also going to seek China exerting some sort of influence over Iran, a close trading partner, of course, when it comes to oil. What do you think is more important for Trump on this trip, trade or Tehran?
I think Trump probably wants China to help with the Iranian war situation, the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, which would be in China's interest anyway. But the Chinese are not going to give him satisfaction if Donald Trump's requirement is that it will be done at the expense of the Iranians. The Chinese supports regime security and regime stability in Iran. They don't want Iran to appear to be losing in this conflict with the United States. So there is a substantial limit to what the Chinese are willing to do. They are much more willing to engage with Donald Trump on economic trade matters, where there are potentially much more deals that they can make.
I want to stay on the topic of Iran for a second. How far do you think China would be willing to go?
Well, not very far at all. If the Trump demand is that China put pressure on Iran, for example, by stopping oil import from Iran in order to get the Iranians to open the Strait of Hormuz, I don't think the Chinese will agree to that. If Donald Trump asked the Chinese to send forces into Iran in order to secure the nuclear materials and therefore deny them to the Iranians, I would be very, very surprised if the Chinese would agree to that either.
The war in Iran weighs heavy on the U.S. president's shoulders right now. He desperately wants out. He's kind of bogged down there. Is that the greatest weakness he's bringing to Beijing today?
And the Chinese are going to make the most of that. The indications coming out from China is that China is in a good position relative to the United States in this summit. And they are going to take advantage of that in order to get a good deal from the US on whatever they can agree to by way of making some kind of a deal. But making some kind of a deal is something they really want to do. They want to make sure the summit meeting is a success. They want to make sure that Donald Trump leaves China having something that he can say is a win and a happy man. They want the relationship between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping to get stronger so that Xi Jinping can use that relationship to engage with Trump later on if necessary.
Briefly before we go, looking at the business delegation that Donald Trump brought to Beijing today, what deals do you think we can expect to be struck in the coming days?
Well, I don't think we are going to see the people, the big names in the delegations, your Elon Musk, your Apple chief or your NVIDIA chiefs going to strike big deals with China with their particular companies.
Right.
We are more likely to see things in terms of Chinese investments in the US or soybeans or Boeing jets type of agreements.
We'll have to leave it there. That was Steve Tsang of SOA's China Institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you.